Let's start learning. Good luck, everyone. One second. Kumulen and Ablak Gemara, Mitzay Shabbos Kedesh Mevorchim Sivan. Okay, we're up to Daf Chav Zayin on the very top of the page. We're still going through, how the carbon, how it was distributed amongst the Kohanim, the different duties they had. But we did conclude in the Mishnah that even though there were different duties, but when you brought your own carbon, a Kohen can do all of them all on his own, doesn't need anybody else to help if he so chooses. But the Mishnah concludes when it comes to stripping the animal and it comes to cutting it up in parts, they whether it's communal carbon, whether it's a private carbon, they both have the same statute. And what is that law? So the Gemara starts off saying it is that a zor, that a Yisro can do it. So both have that same law that a zor is able to do that. So that's what we were going to talk about. That. So Chizki came along and said, how do you know that a Yisro can do these two activities? Because it says in the pasuk that the Bnei Aaron should place the fire on the Mizbech, which is redundant because we know that all the activities have to be done by the Kohanim. So obviously placing the wood on the Mizbech and the fire on the Mizbech has to be done by a Kohen. So it must be that, placing the fire by the Kohen. So it must be it's mainly coming to infer, but not the other activity has to be done by a Kohen, which is stripping Hefshet V'Netuach. Says the Gemara, who said? Maybe the pasuk is not redundant at all. Maybe the pasuk is necessary to tell you that a kohen has to light the fire. That's all. So how do you know that hefsher netuach is permitted? So this is we're up to the top of the page. Says the Gemara. Rav Barashi said, Ashkachte le'Abaye. I once encountered Abaye davimaz b'lei lebrei. He was actually teaching to his son, and he told him the following. He quoted a brayso which says, "V'shochat." It says the pasuk v'shochat. You should shech the cattle before Hashem, and then it says v'hikrivui b'nei Aaron hakoinim, that the children of Aaron the kohanim should bring up the sacrifice, and they bring up the blood and they sprinkle it on the mizbeach around, so on and so forth. So the kohanim don't get introduced a little bit later. So because it says in the beginning of the pasuk v'shochat shchita bezorg shay that a Yisrael can shech a carbon v'yichi ma'ayin basa. So now the brayso goes in fact a step ahead. Why do you even need a pasuk to inform me that a Yisrael can do it? Why would you think he can't? Miklash, and I'm going to tell you why we would have thought he can't. It says in another pasuk, we said another pasuk that you and your children with you, children with you, teach you should protect your kahuna. Sounds like all the activities in the base of Bigdash should be done by kohanim. Shemeni, I would have thought that shchita, that would include shchita as well. Therefore, we have this pasuk v'shochat as ben habaka lifnei Hashem. You should slaughter the animal for Hashem, and only afterwards it says v'kriva b'nei Aaron hakohanim esadam. Only afterwards does it say the kohanim should get involved with the blood, which is kabbalah, receiving the blood, walking with the blood, sprinkling on the mizbeach, and so on. So mikabbalah ve'elech mitzvahs kahuna. From here on in, we know the kohanim have to be involved. And the pasuk before the shechita says v'samach yoda, the person brings his animal to the base of Mikdash, places his hands on the head, does smicha, and then it says v'shachat yishach. It sounds like the same person who did the smicha, the owner of the animal. If he wants to, he can slaughter the animal. Limud ala shechita sheksheda bezor. That's kosher bezor. That's the brayso. How in the world does Rav Abaye want to learn from this brayso, but that you're allowed to strip the animal or cut it up, and that's the domain even of a Yisrael? How do you want to learn that? So he says as follows. Merdi mikabola the Eilish Guna. So what's the brayso? Tell us that every instruction from that pasuk and onwards, we automatically know that kohanim are included. So why is it that a couple of psukim later it says in the pasuk v'nosnu b'nei Aaron hakohen, that the children of Aaron should put the fire on the mizbech and they should prepare the wood on the fire? We know that all the activities afterwards says v'yikrivui b'nei Aaron hakohanim, referring to kohanim. Lamali. So why does it have to tell you that a kohen should do this activity of placing the fire on his mizbech and organizing wood? Obviously, it's not to tell us that a kohen has to do that, but tell us that there's another activity that we don't mind if it's not a kohen. Lemauti hefshet v'netuach. And tell you this other activity which takes place afterwards, stripping the animal and then cutting it up in parts, is can be done by Yisrael. Says the Gemara again. I'm not happy with the Abaye's shot. Akati to know, even though we know that all the activities after the Kabbalah, the blood has to be done by a kohen, but maybe when it comes to placing the fire on the mizbech, the wood of mizbech, we would have thought that a kohen is not necessary. And why would we have thought that? Because we still need the pasuk. I mean, I would have thought, Kivan the lava avoided the ma'akva kapari. It's not an activity that really prevents the kapara from taking place. Only vital activities are to do with the blood of the animal itself, but not regarding placing the wood on the fire. So we would have thought that perhaps Israel can do that. So we need the pasuk to tell you, no, it has to be a kohen. So it's not redundant. It's not at all superfluous. So the question goes back: how do you know that Israel can go ahead and strip the animal? Says the Gemara, actually from the following pasuk, another pasuk where it says, "The orchu b'nei Aaron hakoyenim." It says in another pasuk, "The orchu b'nei Aaron hakoyenim," that the children of Aaron, the kohen, should organize es hanesachim v'esaroish v'esapede, the parts, the head and the fats, on the fire, and so on and so forth. Why do you have to tell me b'nei Aaron have to place it on the mizbech? Merdi mikabola ve'elech mitzvahs kahuna. Anything written after receiving the blood involves a kohen, and any activity afterwards involves a kohen. So why in the world does the pasuk have to say that when it comes to organizing the parts and put it on the mizbech, it has to be b'nei Aaron kohenim? Obviously, it has to be b'nei Aaron kohenim. So it must be limuute hefshid v'netuach. It must be to tell you only this activity requires a kohen, but hefshid netuach doesn't require a kohen. Stripping the animal, or cutting it up in parts doesn't require a kohen. Says the Gemara, the Ema. Why don't we say? How do you know it comes to tell us that hefshid netuach doesn't require a kohen? There's another activity maybe that closely resembles in fact more the activity of placing the wood on the fire. And that is maybe maybe it's coming to tell us that when it comes to organizing those two large pieces of wood across the entire width of the mizbeach, it doesn't have to be done by a kohen. And in fact, it makes more sense because we're talking about wood and it's talking about wood as well. Says the Gemara. It's not the wood. It's talking about placing the parts on top of the fire on the mizbech. So we're talking about the fire. So maybe it's telling you there's another activity to do with the fire, and that's bringing these two pieces of wood, and a kohen doesn't have to do that. Says the Gemara, the Gemara mistabred makes sense. Dipcha, the kavose memai. We're talking about the animal itself, and probably we're talking about some other activity to do with the animal that a kohen is not necessary. So therefore we say, and we're talking about also the parts. So we're saying about the stripping of the part, the cutting up of the parts doesn't have to be done by a kohen. Says the Gemara, on the contrary, we're talking about organizing. You're organizing the parts on the mizbech. So it's coming to exclude or negate. There's another organizing, which is organizing the wood on the mizbech. Doesn't require a kohen. In fact, that's even more similar. How do you know which one to exclude? So that it can't be. It cannot be that it's coming to exclude those two pieces of wood, and therefore we have no other choice but to say it's coming to exclude. We have no other choice but to say that it's coming to exclude. What do you call it? It's coming to exclude hefshev v'netuach. And why is it that we have no other choice? Because the Amamah we learned. It says in pasuk, another pasuk, v'hikriv hakoyin es hakol. The kohen should bring up everything and roast it on the mizbech. So why does it mention kohen here? So we darshan, what is it talking about when it says the kohen should bring everything? What should he bring? That a kohen has to bring the limbs to the ramp. Who has to bring the limbs? The limbs that were taken apart, they have to be brought to the ramp. It has to be a kohen. So we darshan that when, and it says over here kohen. So why do you have to stress kohen? Only the kohen has to bring the limbs to the ramp, but halachas eitzim loy boykuna. But a kohen doesn't have to bring the wood to the ramp. So the wood you have to bring to the ramp. But there's another activity to do with wood, which a kohen has to do, and that is placing the shnei gziri eitzim on top of the mizbech. That's much more of an avodah than just bringing the wood close to the mizbech. Hasidish shnei gziri eitzim boykuna requires kuna. So we know the shnei gziri eitzim require kahuna. If the pasuk is before Orch b'nei Aaron is coming to exclude something, must be it's coming to negate the activity of kohen when it comes to the sachim and hefshed. Over there, it could be done by Yisrael. So why does it say v'orchu? Must be l'mu'ute hefshed v'netuach. Must be is coming to say over here the kohenim have to organize the limbs on the mizbech, but they don't have to actually strip it and cut them up themselves. Says the Gemara ve'ema, why don't we say hachinami legufe? Why did we say that? We also need just to tell you that a kohen has to bring the limbs on the mizbeach. It's not such an important activity, and maybe we would have thought that a kohen doesn't do it if we need it for itself. It's not extra. So this other pasuk, the hiktir hakoyin is hakoyin. The kohen should then do everything. What does that come from? It comes from Muslim Mute Hefshev in a It's coming to tell you that but it comes to Hefshet and in a Tuach, it doesn't have to be done by kohen. So now that it says a number of times hakoyin, each one is extra. Each one comes to teach you a din. The Gemara quickly summarizes what each one comes to tell you, which we just learned. The hikid of hakoyin, that the passage where it says that the kohen should be maked of everything. Okay, from the hikid hakoyin, the kohen should roast everything. We learn out this activity requires a kohen, but not when it comes to stripping the hide or cutting it up. Fine. What do you call it? But the pasuk that talks about first to bring it to the mizbeach. The hikr about zu there. From there we learn out halachas evarim lakedesh. Who has to bring the parts to the ramp? It has to be a kohen. Halachas levarim lakedesh the boy kahuna. But for why do you have to say that? Obviously, a kohen has to do that. All the activities after in the pasuk there where it says why do you have to tell me? Again, so the reason is because we want to learn from there an inference, but halachas eitim lo b'yekuna. Bringing the wood does not require kuna. Okay, and then it's bahasidush negzirei b'yekuna. We learn two things from there. First of all, by inference, we learn out that bringing the parts to the ramp is an avoid of the kuna, but bringing wood to near the ramp is not an avoid of the kuna. But placing the wood on top of the bed, that is avoid that requires a kohen. Then the nasnu in the first part is that putting the fire on his beach, legufe, we need that for itself. I'll tell you that a kohen has to do that. The orchu and the pasuk that says the orchu we also need. The orchu is in plural, so shnaim that's two. Bnei Adam is in plural, that's shnaim that's two. Hakoinim shnaim that's two. Lamadnu from here we learn out letle. From here we learn out that a sheep should tow and shisha requires 6 people. That you need 6 people to take care of a sheep. We learned already before 5, the different parts of the body, the head, the tail, and the flanken, and the forelegs, and so on, and then 1 for the innards, a total of 6. Machlekes in the Rishonim, whether from the ramp to Mizbeach, he requires 6 again. We talked about last time, where just 1 person does it himself. Anyway, Amar Rav Hamnuna says, Kash Leila Rabbi Elazar had a question. He wanted to know, Rabbi Elazar had a question. Hi, you're telling me that a sheep requires only 6, but this very pasuk where it says Orchu is actually talking about by cattle, and over there we learned in the Mishnah we need 24. We learned in the previous Mishnah you need 24 people involved in carrying because it's such a big and the what do you call it? The nesachim that came with it was quite substantial. So he answered his question to himself. The pasuk says, "Ala eitzim asher al eitzim shalom mizbeach." You should place it on the wood on the fire that's on the mizbeach. Eizehu davar shenema by eitzim eitzim mizbeach. Where do you find that you need wood? There's only 1 carbon that we have to make sure there's wood in the morning. All of the kabbalah, there's wood on the mizbeach. You just leave it in. There's only 1 carbon as a prerequisite. First, you have to put shneik eitzim and all that, and that's a carbon tamid in the morning, which is a lamb. So even though this particular pasuk is talking about oila, because that's the first time when the pasuk tells you how it should be done. So it says the orchu regarding an oila, but the Torah is not limiting the orchu to an oila, which requires 24 people. We're actually talking about in the pasuk it hints by saying on the wood, on the fire, on the mizbeach, there's only 1 carbon every day that requires 18 eishim mizbeach, and that's a carbon tamid shel shachris, because right before you bring that first carbon tamid, you have to put wood there. So and that's a sheep over there. So therefore we say you need a total of 6 people. Comes along a new Gemara, talking about activities that a Yisrael is permitted to do. Now we're talking about activities that Yisrael is forbidden to do. And if Yisrael does it, he might be even chayiv misa. First he started saying, Zor, a Yisrael. She said this Amarocha of Yisrael organized the Marocha. If he organized the wood on the Mizbeach, he is chayiv misa. So Kate said, how's he rectify it? Parka, he has to remove the wood, and then the chayz of the seder would put it back on again. If he puts it back on again, what did you achieve? Elaparka removes it, Zora Yisrael can remove it. Why should a kohen bother to remove the wood that a Yisrael put on when he shouldn't have? V'soidra kohen, but a kohen organizes it afterwards. There's a machlekes if the Yisrael by doing this, it's sort of the tshuva, and he won't be killed anymore, or the Yisrael will still get killed. And the question is only how do we fix up the mizbeach for future kabbalas. So Maskul and Abzeder asked a question of Yechon. So you, Rabbi Yechon, argue that a Yisrael that sets up the wood on the mizbeach is chayim misa, and the lechayda, that's that activity of setting up wood on the mizbeach is not an activity that deserves misa. And why not? We'll have two different points that perhaps it doesn't meet the criteria. Point number one, Maskul Abzeder, this activity of placing the wood is kosher by night. And yet a psula bazar, if Yisrael does it, it's possible. In fact, not only I have a problem with the misa, I'm not even sure if Yisrael does it so bad. It's not an avodah. The fact that you place the wood at night, on the very early hours in the morning before it gets light, so therefore it's not an avodah, because all the avodas are kohanim during the day. So therefore, a Yisrael not only won't get misa, maybe he's even permitted to do it. Says the Gemara, I don't understand your question. Now we're asking a question on the question. I don't understand your question. What do you mean? There's no activities that a kohen has to do at night. What about the limbs and the fats, left over from the karma during the day? It's brought up at night, and the kohenim have to stay watch until midnight. So if it pops off, you have to put it back on the mizbeach. So we answered, no. Even though you do it at night, safe avoided the yamami. You start doing it as soon as you finish your kabbalas, you can start taking the fats and put it on the mizbeach. If you don't have enough time, you didn't finish, you continue into the night. So it's really a day activity that's being pushed off into the night. It's not a night activity. So therefore, of course, a kohen has to do that. Okay, what about truma sadesh? And what about removing the ashes in the morning? You do that when it's still dark outside, and that's avodah only for the kohenim. So you see, there are night activities that are considered avodah. So why do you have a problem with setting up the wood? And you're saying, maybe Yisrael can do that. So Moshe said again, Trumas Hadeshin, I treat it as Tchilas Avodah Diyamami. Trumas Hadeshin, even though it's done at night, is not a night activity. It's a day activity, a preparation for the day, so it's already considered as if it's a day activity. And in fact, we learned the halacha, which we learned a few days ago, because Rabbi Abasi said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, Kiddush Yodov L'Trumas Hadeshin. If the kohen washed his hands properly, the hands and the feet, the method that you're supposed to do, both hands and both feet from the kir, and he did it for Trumas Hadeshin, even though it's middle of the night. If he was careful and maintained his hands to stay Torah, L'Machar, and the following day in the daytime, Einot Tzarich L'Kaddish, doesn't have to wash it again. Shekvar Kiddush M'Tchilas Avodah. Every morning you have to wash your hands, but here we'll consider the washing of the hands that you did for Trumas Hadeshin sufficient for the day. What does that prove? That Trumas Hadeshin is actually a day activity, the beginning of the day. Even though it's dark outside, it's considered the beginning of the day. But Abzeda is right. But a night activity, which is only done at night, there's no avodah. So why can't Yisrael do that? Well, Akashi got a problem. Rabbi Yechon's din. So Gemara says, you're right. Let's amend Rabbi Yechon's din. But this is Rabbi Yechon wanted to say. Rabbi Yechon, Zor for Yisrael, Shesidish Negziri Eitzim, not the general wood on the mizbeach. That's not an avodah. But the two pieces of wood, if you put that across the mizbeach, then chayiv. That's an activity that deserves a kohen is chayiv. Hoyil va'avodas yaimu. That's an activity of the day. We just said it's the beginning of the day, and therefore Yisrael does it is chayiv misa. Okay, Rav Zayda was happy, but the Rava wasn't. Rav asked a question. If so, you're telling me that's considered an essential activity, putting those organized pieces of wood. So tell me, so tibayi pais. How come we don't find that there's a lottery for a kohen who's going to get this activity? If you tell me it's an avodah, requires a kohen, why isn't there a lottery drawn for that? Says the Gemara, Ishtamite, did you forget what we learned a few days ago? Hadatani, remember we said when we put in the instituted that they made a goydel for the activity in the morning of Trumas Hadeshin, and nobody wanted to come. Because what you wake up in the early hours in the morning and then you don't win, you got it for nothing. So as an incentive, as an inducement, they said, you know what? Whoever wins Trumas Hadeshin will also do the Shnei Gziri. So there is a lottery for it. So Rav, you have no question. How time you learn? Misha Zacham Trumas Hadeshin. Whoever merited that Zacham Siddur Aracha. Uve Siddur Shnei Gziri has both activities of placing the wood and Gziri. Okay, so therefore Rav's question falls away. So the Gemara, so what do we see from Rabbi Yechon? We see from Rava's question he asked, how come there's not a payah? It sounds from Rava that every activity in the base of Mikdash during the day that needed a kohen, required a kohen, requires a payas. He's asking how come Shnei Gziri Eitzim did. No, he forgot that there is. So let me ask another question. The member you just established avodas you by payas. Every activity of the day requires a lottery. Avodas laila by payas, but avodas the night does not require lottery. What about Evodim upedorim. What about limbs and fats? It's an avodah. It's avoid of the night. And yet there's a lottery for those who put the Evodim upedorim on the Mizbeach. So we're answered again. Same answer before. Even though it's done at night, it's really part of the day. In fact, you can start during the day. It's not a night activity, and therefore it required a pious. But a trumas adesher, because the most thing Rabbi said only a day activity requires pious. What about trumas adesher? It's a night activity. So we answer that's different. Because of that, what happened there, how the Kohen and maltreated each other. So for safety reasons, they put in a pious there. That's different. Says the Gemara. So the memra, what else can we glean from Rava? The avodas yom, the activity of the day. Ushazar chayiv misa, the activity of the day. And if a Yisrael is chayiv misa, in other words, it's really a significant avodah that belongs to the koyanim, and if a Yisrael somehow infringes and does it himself is chayiv misa. So there's two criteria: it has to be done during the day, and also a Yisrael is chayiv misa. By payis, that's when it requires lottery. But if it's an activity that is not chai misa, like by payis, you don't require lottery. What about shchita? So how come it was in the lottery? If you remember, there was top of the 9, there was a top of the 5. There's also the 4. One of them was shchita. So what about shchita? How comes the lottery for that Yisrael is permitted? Shiny shchita, the tchilas avodah. It's such a significant part of the avodah, even though Yisrael can do that, but because this starts, commences all the proceedings, so a kohen they made a lottery for the kohen. In fact, didn't we learn this way? We did not learn this way. What do you mean we did not learn this way? He's asking a question of Rabbi Yechina. Rabbi Yechina said that if you do that, if a Yisrael sets up the Gzerei he's Chai Misa. We didn't learn this way because we'll see the guy in charge would say, I want you to go out and see. I want you to go out and look and tell me, did the time come yet for shechting or not? You're right? And we'll learn this in the tomorrow Mishnah. Man. Doesn't say go out there and find out the time of when you should put out the 2 gzile eitzim. So that means you can even do it at night. It's not really. It could be done. In other words, we don't care if it's done at night. When it comes to the shechita, we say go out and see, make sure it's daytime, and so on and so forth. And he doesn't say go out and before you put the gzile eitzim on the bed, make sure it's daytime, which proves that we don't care if it's done at night. And you just said that only day activities and Yisrael gets killed and there's chashuv you make a pice. Says the Gemara, no. Really, it hardly ever happened that they made a mistake between night and day. But we were just precautious. But when it comes to a tamid, if they shechted it wrongly, that's it. You pass the carbon, we'll learn the Mishnah, they had to burn it and so on and so forth. But when it comes to the Gzei Eitzim, if they did it wrong, what's the big deal? You remove it and you put new ones on at the right time. So they didn't have to take those extra precautions. For Gzirei Eitzim, because they got it wrong, you can always fix it up. So Gemara says, no proof of it. Hach the less like tantik toni, that which you can remedy, we told you what to do. But hach the east like the kantik like doesn't mention. Okay, so that's one version of what Rabbi Yechina said. The Ikadami is another version of what Rabbi Yechina said. That Rabbi Yechina, another version of Rabbi Zayda's question of Rabbi Yechina said initially that if a zor goes over and sets up the wood on the maracha, he's chayiv misa. So the first question was it doesn't meet the right criteria because he thought it was a night activity, and night activity there's no avodah Yisrael can do. Okay, so then Rabbi Yechina had to change his mind and say, I'm talking about Shnei Gzirei Eitzim, I'm not talking about the red general wood. Now Rabbi Zayda, the second version is, similarly, Rabbi Yechina said if you place wood on the Mizbeach, Yisrael's Chai Misa, but the question is not going to be from the fact that it's a night activity, the question is going to be from another criterion, and that is, it had to be Avodah Tama. It has to be an Avodah that ends the Avodah. If there's still a series of Avodas that have to continue afterwards, then if Yisrael does one of those steps, he's not Chai Misa. So the Chayda placing the wood in Mizbeach is not an end in itself. It's only a means to an end. It's the beginning of a series. And you put the Gzei Eitzim, and then you do Kabbanis. So Maskar of Zayda, is there an Avodah that requires another Avodah afterwards? Upsula Bezar. And you tell me that a Zor, if he does a Chai Misa, what's a Chai Misa? Because remember, right after you're placing the wood in Mizbeach, you place those Shnei Gzirei Eitzim. So this is only a step before the final step. That's his question. Says the Gemara, what do you mean? The limbs and the fats, they are l'chayda on the Mizbeach. After you put the limbs and the fats on the mizbeach, you wait a few hours, it turns to ashes, and that's a trumas hadeshin. So the limbs and the fats are not the end of avodah, and yet if Yisrael does it, it's chayim misa. You made Yudab Zayda made a rule that it has to be the final avodah. If Yisrael does it, chayim misa. What about Abraham Tan? It's not the final avodah if Yisrael does chayim misa. So we answered like before. Saif avodah the imami. No. It doesn't look. It's not a continuation. Avraham Darim ends is the finality of the previous day. The ashes is a new activity starting a new day. So therefore, that's the end of the avodah, and that's why Yisrael gets killed. So what about Trumas Hadeshin? What about Trumas Hadeshin in the morning as well? Remember that afterwards, the Trumas Hadeshin are two parts. You had to scoop a certain nominal amount every single day. And then when there was a heap, they took a whole bunch out. So the Trumas Hadeshin was like a precursor for the next one, which is, the Haramas Hadeshin, cleaning it all out. So we answer. So why is it chayim? It's another step that goes afterwards. Says the Gemara, the trumas that chilas avodah the imami is considered. It's considered the avodah on its own of the day. It's an avodah on its own. Like we said before, and therefore it's chashuv enough that it's chayim. He said that kiddush of the tradition. If a kohen washes his hands for possession, the following day, any other kaddish doesn't have to wash again. She kavod kiddush mitchil avodah. So he took care of with avodah. So therefore we see that. So therefore we see that's different. So the rule is right. Abzeida's rule is right. That if it's a middle of avodah, it's nothing. And the avodah pedorim and possession is exception. So how can Rabbi Yochanan say that if you put wood on the mizbeach, that Yisrael is chayiv? It's only an introduction. It's only a first part of a series of activities. The finale of that is the shnei gziri. So why would you be chayiv misa? Ela kasha Rabbi Yochanan. So we answered before. Eli Marach Idma will amend Rabbi Yochanan's words. He wasn't referring to the general wood you put on top of the mizbeach. He was talking about Zor Shesida Shnei Gziri Eitzim Chayiv. We're talking about placing those two pieces of wood across. So the second examiner agrees to the first one is just how we got to it. The Zayda's question. This is a complete avodah. Masculine Rav. So Rav asked the question on the since you tell me that placing the two pieces of wood is a complete avodah to buy it, and he still gets killed for it. Why don't you make a goydel for it? Says previously we said he forgot. Here we're a bit more respectful. We don't require a lottery. But Tanya, we learned there is a lottery for the two gziri. It's included in the lottery of Trumas Hadeshin. So therefore, it's a chashuv activity and it has a lottery. So Rabbi said, I'll tell you what I meant to say. I'm aware that it's included in the other lottery. But my question is, if it's that significant, it should have its own lottery. Says the Gemara Kedam B'Rinu. You remember what we said last time? We needed to find an inducement to convince the kohen to wake up early in the morning for a lottery for Trumas Hadeshin, and therefore we had to offer them also the schus of placing the Shnei Gziri Eitzim. That's why. Otherwise, you're right. We would have made a separate lottery for the Shnei Gziri Eitzim. Says the Gemara. So what are we saying? You remember that you established avodah tama. If it's a complete avodah, the end. The zor chayv misa. It's a chashav avodah. The zor chayv misa. Boy pais. That's when you need a lottery. Ein zor chayv misa. We saw the chayv misa. Loy boy pais. So it's a similar Gemara we had before. You don't need a lottery. So tell me, how come shchita? Shchita is done by Yisrael, and yet there was a lottery drawn for which kohen would get it. Shiny shchita shiny. Why? Shiny shchita that chilus avodah mami. Why is shchita different? Because this is the beginning of the whole avodah. It's so chashuv, and that's why it's given to a kohen. Says the Gemara, remember the avodah tama boy pais that are only when it's a finality. You have a lottery. But if there are other activities following that, you don't require a lottery. So tell me, how come Avodim don't have a lottery? The Trumas Hadeshin follows that. So we answer, because Seif avoided the Imamut, part of the day activity, it ends the day. Trumas Hadeshin. What about Trumas Hadeshin? How come you make a lottery there? There's more activities afterwards. Taking away the big ash pile. Again, because of that incident where the kohen safety was being threatened, so we had no choice. We had to make a lottery. In fact, we actually learned this as well. Now we're going to bring a proof. Before was a question, I'm bringing a proof. Go and see. Shchita came along. It doesn't mention this man of Gezirei Eitzim. It doesn't mention at all. In other words, because it's not an avodah tamba. So we answered no proof. Hach the less later contact tani, that which has no remedy, a carbon tummy, if you shechted in the wrong time, it's finished. Hach the east later contact, but if something that can be remedied, just take it off and put it back on, is like tani, it doesn't mention. So there's nothing really, you think it's a night activity, and you think it finished the day before. No, it could be a day activity. So how come we're not so pedantic and not so careful to make sure that it's still daytime? But generally speaking, we always know when it's day. A one-off event happened that we made a special chumrah, and we didn't feel that we had to put this gezerah in also regarding the shnei gzeri eitzim, because you can always remedy the situation. If you don't mind, tomorrow I would like to learn two blot, because I'm not here Monday morning. So I would like to learn those two blot. And it's short, it's agadata, so it'll be pretty quick. So it won't be that long. Maybe 45 minutes, the whole thing.
Fine. 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I've forgotten, how far can a Yisrael go in the Azorah? Obviously, from this, he's allowed to go up to the Mizbeach.
You have 11 Amos. You have 11 Amos where, which is what do you call it? With Yisrael, which Yisrael is, which is the Ezra's Yisrael. Then you have the Ezra's Kohanim 21 Amos. But if he steps there, you're not chayav misa for that. We're not talking about that he's allowed to do this. He shouldn't be doing this. But if he does it, when it comes to stripping and all that, he can take it outside the Ezra's Kohanim and do it somewhere else. But if he, we're talking about, let's say, going to the Mizbeach and placing the wood, he's actually stepping into the Ezra's Kohanim section. Chayav misa is when you walk between the Mizbeach and the Ulam, in that section.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't have to go there. He goes in the Ezra's Kohanim side.
They could go in the north of the Mizbeach to do the Shechita.
Yeah. I say, but the only part that you're not allowed to go is between the Mizbeach and the Ulam. That area there. Shouldn't be going. Yeah, otherwise his whole Gemara is difficult to understand. How can he go ahead and put wood on the Mizbeach and all that?
And do the Shechita and everything else, yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Good